Hello and welcome to part 2 of the NVivo method. I'm Anthony Condon, and what I'm going to do in this video is, now we have all of our sources loaded into NVivo and classified with their dates, now we need to go through and look for all the words. So I'll start by showing you my word list. So I'll just jump back over to my other screen so you can have a look. Try and remember not to have it up there all the time now. So you can see here I have my militaristic, non-sticky militaristic, aggressive conscription, Charteris black. So militaristic with the words that stick. So you can see here Anzac doesn't happen twice because obviously Anzac doesn't exist before the First World War. So it really upset the rate of change when looking at it by having Anzac in there, having a word that got invented during the war. Aggressive, conscription, and Charteris black, like I said, is a existing word source that's being used. Beside these, I've got how many should be in each one, just so that when you can see here, I'll select a few, it says how many I've selected. This helps me to keep in mind. Just helps me to double check that I've used every word that I'm supposed to be using. And you can see here I've also got colors. I will code the nodes into those colors. That does help me just to keep an eye on everything and to just makes things easier to look at a glance, I guess we'll say. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and code these in. So a few notes on some of the words that I look for. So with all of these words, I'm doing what's called a stem search. And I'll just flick back over to NVivo. So if we go up to query and we do a text search, we can see here we've got a few different ways that we can search. Now for nearly all of mine, I'm doing a stem search. So you can see here that finds things like, rather than just talk, talking, talks, talked, etc. Now some of my words I don't do this stem search on. One is fight, although I do both for fight because it depends on what lists it's in. Some of them I do a synonym search, and that obviously finds a much bigger list. So the one I use the stem search is in the Charteris black one because they haven't used a synonym search. So just trying to keep that a little bit more normal. The other one is with my shirk list. So the reason I can't do a stem search for shirk The reason I can't do a stem search for shirk is because at this period in Adelaide, there's a doctor called Dr. Shirk. And so I found when I went to do the Adelaide papers, the stem search for shirk just ended up giving me a whole lot of false positives. So I'd normally get maybe 5 or 6 results for shirk, but in the Adelaide papers, I was getting hundreds. So I had to change that to shirker or shirkers or shirking or shirked, not shirk. And that has to be an exact search. So that's the big differences that I make there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and code these in. Let's do this search. So my first word is Anzac. So I just pop Anzac in here. Go for stem search, run query, and save results. It brings up those results. So I write in Anzac stem. I call it stem. Just helps me know which one's stems and which ones aren't. And OK, and I end up with this list here. So when I'm doing this, I like to be in queries results because then I can see which ones I've already done. Click back on query, and rather than doing text search, I just go to last run query because I find deleting the Anzac is easier than changing that down to stem each time. And so what I'll do is I'll go through and I will pop these in and fast forward through that, and I'll come back when I'm done that to keep going. One thing before I keep going is it is really important at this stage that you get this right. Don't make mistakes here because you don't really have another chance to check to make sure you didn't make a mistake. If you make a spelling mistake here, it's going to continue on throughout throughout the study. So it's very important that you get your spelling right here. And the other mistake that I made a lot here is when it comes time to change the slider over here, when I do my fight and my shirk list, it's just really important you put it back. I've noticed that I forget to do that a lot. So I'll put these in and be back in a moment. Okay, so as you can see, if I jump back over to my list, as you can see, I've got here marked how many I should have. I should have 39, and over here you can see I have 37. So I've obviously missed 2. So this is one of my error checking places, so I can just quickly have a look to see which ones I have missed. I've got battalion, battle, belligerent, so no blitz. So I haven't done blitz. Blitz is one I forget all the time. And almost guarantee you this won't have any results. As I said, not really a World War I thing. You can see, there we go, no results. Oops. So you can see, yep, with blitz I got no results. So blitz, brigade, campaign, combat, conscript, conquer, defeat, defend, no defend. Defend is my other one that I missed. So defend, run and save results, defend, stem. Okay, and you can see, yep, there was some results for defend. So this is another chance that I get to, I don't know what's there. This is another chance where you get to do some error checking. So one of the things I like to check is these 2 columns here. So what I'll do is I'll pop them all in order, and then I'll look for ones that have the same number of sources and the same number of references, because that might suggest that I've looked for the same one twice and called it by the wrong name. So especially if there's 2 next to each other in the list, then that might be an indication that something's gone wrong. So if I go down shirk and slaughter, you can see there, that one I normally would be like, okay, they're next to each other, so I should double check them. But I noticed that as it happened, and that one is all okay. We run down. So you can see here 79, 79, but 119 and 100, so they're obviously different. Okay, so that's all okay. Okay, so now I need to code all of these into nodes. Now, I kind of feel like there should be an automatic way of doing this, but it doesn't seem like there is a way to make these all nodes. I can make them all nodes at once, but not all together. And one of the other things that's worth pointing out here is that when I do my text search query, I could actually be putting in my entire list of words here for each of my strings and doing a search that way. And that would save me a lot of time. I'd only have to put together 5 lists rather than 39 items. The reason why I like doing each one individually is because it brings out things that I may not have found otherwise. And it also means that I'm just being a little bit more careful about checking every step. So I'll give you an example. So for example, truce. There's a 0 on a truce. Now, I find it a little bit, I find it interesting that at the end of the World War I, it seems no one was talking about it being a truce. And I think that's quite enlightening as to how people were feeling about the end of the war. It definitely wasn't fought to a standstill and then both sides decided to stop. It was definitely perceived, in this press at least, as a victory. And you can see that by the difference between victory and truce. So this is somewhere where I could then go back and have a look at truce as an individual word across all of my newspapers. And because it's not very common most of the time, I would actually be able to see when does it get used, why does it get used, and I can do a very deep dive down into that one individual word. And that's where you can really enlighten a lot of the work. So anyway, before we get to that, we need to code our nodes. Now, this is the easiest way I've found to do this. So there's a few different ways, but I like to right click, and then we need to create as node. But you can see there, the short key to there is E, short key to there is N. So if I get rid of that, and I right click on Anzac, E, N, enter, I'm in my nodes bit, and then I can write Anzac stem, enter. That will now be in my nodes. I'll show you that in a minute. I'll just go through and put all these in, and then be back to explain the nodes. Okay, so they're now all coded into nodes, and you would have seen me go back and correct the spelling on a few things there. One I've stuffed up completely, and I'll have to fix in a second. It really doesn't matter whether or not you get spelling and things like that right on your nodes, because that's not the actual spelling that you're looking for is hidden in behind all of that. So, however, I'm tried to be very particular about keeping things neat and organized in this, because it's such a big project and there is so much data that if you just take the time to be a little bit more accurate at the start, it's a good chance you're going to find problems or avoid problems. So here you can see the one that I missed, and that all I'm going to do is just rename that into, that was defend, so defend stem. Oh, no it wasn't. Defeat, it was defeat. So you see that I just tried to call it one that was already named and it wouldn't let me. So that's another good little breaker from you making a mistake, that if you do hit the wrong node and try to call it something else, so as long as you also name that something else in its right name, if you get them both the same, it'll jump up and say you can't do that. So another little thing in there to help. Now, I also use colors. I'm not 100% sure if this is necessary at this point, but again, just helps me keep things organized. I do use it for my strings, and I have found that really useful. Now, I take all of these items that I've coded and I put it into the items folder that I've created before. And this is just, again, to help keep things orderly. Now, for the strings. So, if I jump back over to my word list, you'll see I've developed several what I call strings. So these are lists of words. So I have my militaristic string, my non-sticky militaristic string, and that comes from some of the closer looking at some of the words that I've done. So in another video, I'll show you how I chose my word list. What I found was some of these words, so Anzac, for example, that's very useless in terms of showing change over time, because the word just didn't exist before the start of the war. So obviously there's a massive jump up. That in itself is interesting, and it's worth looking at that on its own. But putting it into a bigger string really does sort of distort that information. The other two that I found quite interesting was war and soldier, because war after the war really gets used what I like to call epically. So it's a marker of a time period. So before the war, after the war, and this is used in any context. So it doesn't really tell you about the increase in militaristic language in the period as so much that there is something that everybody then marks before and after. Same with soldier. Soldier just becomes a way of naming someone. So it becomes Return Soldier Joe Smith, that kind of thing. And again, with no other context to the war. So I made a second list that cuts them out. And you can see here I've got my number of nodes that goes in each one, just to help me keep that in check. And that's also why I code nodes for the words that have 0, and I keep putting them in no matter, even though they do have 0, I keep putting them into the list, so that way I know that I've got all my words. I've then got an aggressive list, conscription list, and my Chartierist black list. So we'll jump back over. Okay, so now I need to create strings, and this is just simply a matter of going through and putting my list together. So my militaristic list, Anzac, Army, Okay, and my list tells me I should have 18, and 18 I do, so I'm going to go ahead and create that node. Now, I already have a place to put this string, so because I'm not trying to get through this really quickly, I don't just pop it into nodes, I'll pop it into strings straight away. Give it a name, so this is militaristic string item. So this is all the items, because I also will code all the sources in a minute. And I like to give these colors, so this is blue. Okay, so that's you can now see that I now have that string in here, all the sources, all the references. So I'll just go through and code my different strings, and then I'll explain the next step. Okay. So now what I need to do is I need to code each of these sources individually. So you can see here that in my aggressive string there's 1,022 total sources, but those words come up 3,389 times. So if I want to see how frequently words are being used as a function of the amount of articles that are being printed, I need to have just the sources coded rather than the references. So at the moment I could look how many per total words, but I'm actually interested in total versus the total number of sources. So what I do is I need to click on aggressive string item, double click on that, and that brings up the list of, so you can see all the codes that are in there at the moment. If I go to summary, this gives me all of the sources that this is coding to, so I just need to highlight all of these and create as a node, and this goes into my strings folder, and this is my aggressive string source. So as opposed to my items, these are my sources. Give it my color, and okay, and that'll code that in. So I'm going to do that for each of these. Okay, so you can see here I have my 5 different strings coded into their 2 different types. This is one of the reasons why I like to use colors here, because at a glance I can look over and see that I've got them all. You should also have 1, 2, 3 numbers the same, 1, 2, 3 numbers the same, 1, 2, 3 numbers the same, and so on. If you don't, something's gone wrong. So another place where you just check your work. Now, of course, because I'm doing a coding, I'm doing it as a percentage of the total sources, I of course will need my total sources coded as well. So that's just a matter of going back, selecting all of my sources, and create as a node, and this goes in my strings, and I just call this one total sources and no color, and that's that. So there you have it. I now have my source classifications coded in, which is my dates, which is my x-axis, and I have my nodes coded in, which is my word strings, or in other words, my y-axis. So what I need to do now is I need to export them all into a format that MATLAB can read, so MATLAB can graph them. So I'll be back in the next video with an explanation of how to do the matrix coding queries.